Welcome back to the Guillemot Kayaks workshop. In this series, I'm working with Chesapeake Lightcraft to supply a kit for my Petrel Play SG design. This is a stitch and glue Petrel Play. In a previous series, I built the strip-built Petrel Play. This is essentially the same design, but built with plywood as opposed to cedar strips. So you could build it either way, and Chesapeake Lightcraft creates kits for both the stitch and glue and the strip built versions. And if you're really ambitious, you could build the hull out of the stitch and glue and the deck out of the strip built and make a hybrid, and that could be a really cool way to build the boat. We don't actually have a kit set up for that, but if you're ambitious, it could be a cool way to make a boat. So in the last episode, we opened up the kit as it came directly from Chesapeake Lightcraft. We identified all the parts, found the manual, and started to lay out the parts and organize them for the build. In this episode, we'll start the actual process of building the boat. And the first thing we're going to do is stain some of the panels. The Akume marine plywood we use is really nice stuff. I find the color a little bit boring, so to give it a little bit of pop, we're going to put some stain on it. And this stain is a product you can get from Chesapeake Lightcraft. It's an alcohol-based stain which is compatible with the epoxy. And then when we're done staining, we're going to put a coat of epoxy on to protect that stain while we do the rest of the building process. So thanks for tuning in, and let's get down to staining. All right, so we just came back from looking at what the stained boat looks like. And what do you think? You like the idea of staining?
I like the stain. I like the accent on the puzzle piece.
Yeah, I think that looks cool. So as you saw in that other boat, the green one, the one that came off the car, we sort of stained the front pieces on the deck and the deck sides, then down onto the hull sides. So that's these pieces here. Let's see, we didn't do the front deck, or the deck right in front. These two little front deck pieces, and let's see, then we did the back deck, right? These back deck, so these pieces here, and Alright, so that was the front hull pieces. So these side pieces, and then these little doobery-doos here on the cheaters. Alright, so we need to get everything that's not going to be stained off of here. We'll work on here to do our staining. So we want, so I find this cardboard here that we've been, that the kit came in. This makes a good work surface. If you don't happen to have a big table already, this is kind of a convenient big table. I've got some big tables, but this is something you can drip epoxy on, you can get stain on, you're not worried about it. You can get rid of some of the loose pieces of tape, but basically it's a good work surface. So these pieces get stained. And then we've got the hull sides and those little cheater bits. Let's see if we can positively identify these as the hull side pieces. So if we look at the hull side, we want the bow end of the hull side.
Bow end of the hull side. So that will be forward, left side panel. So that's going to be the part with the sharp, sticky on piece.
Yeah, so this little piece sticking out.
Yeah.
So if we're looking at the hull side here, this is a hull side, and we have that one little horn sticking out right here. So that's this one little horn sticking out right there. So we have, again, we want to get the outside up. So that means the bevel side down. Get these all spread out, each with their own space. We're planning on staining this. So I've got some stain here. I just went through my collection of stain, and my scientific way of selecting this color is this is the one I had the most of. So this is a medium brown mahogany. This stain is called Solar Lux stain. These bottles are from H. Balin. I don't think this company exists anymore, but Chesapeake Light Craft sells Mohawk, which now sells this brand of stain. It's an alcohol-based dye stain, so you do not want to use an oil-based stain because this is all going to get epoxy on it, and oil and epoxy do not mix. So we're going to use that. And so this is medium brown mahogany, light brown, medium brown mahogany. So if this is the bare wood here, this is with a little bit of epoxy on it. This is with fiberglass on it. This is with fiberglass and a fill coat. So you see the color changes quite a bit as you put more finish on it. And you know, that'll be a nice sort of rich color. You've used oil-based stains?
I've used stains, yeah.
Yeah. So with an oil-based stain, what's the process for putting oil-based stain on?
You rub it on.
You just rub it on.
Yeah.
And after a while, you might rub some off.
Yeah.
Right? So that's oil-based.
Okay.
This is alcohol-based. So this stuff evaporates very quickly.
So you can get streaky?
It wants to streak. In the process of doing this, we'll have gloves and a rag, and we will make the rag very wet and go as far as we can with that while it's still pretty wet. As it starts to dry out, we'll want to load up the rag again and keep on going. Don't go over the places more than once if you can help it.
Okay.
Because each time you go over it with a wet rag, it thickens the stain.
Subsequent stain.
Yeah, so even if it looks lighter than what you've just done, it may have dried out. Okay. So pay attention to where you have missed, but if you've gone over it once, it's probably got stain on it. I have a process for evening it all out when we're done, but we're going to ignore that for now and try and do a good job the first time. Again, we've got all the pieces we want to stain here laid out. So there's the bevel on these long edges. We want that down because we are staining the outside. We don't need to stain the inside. Inspect it for stray pieces of tape, anything that might hinder our ability to get stain on it. So I'm just using standard shop rags. You can buy these at Home Depot or whatever. Basically, it's old t-shirts. Actually, this is probably new t-shirts, but old t-shirts work great. You don't need a big piece, so I'm just going to cut these in half, and that should be enough, one for each of us. We have nitrile gloves.
Do you have to worry about the lint from the edges of
I'm not really worried about it. So one of the differences with this alcohol-based stain is an oil-based stain, there's actually oil that gets left behind along with the stain. So you're putting on an oil finish that has some color in it. Mm-hmm. This really isn't a finish at all. All it is a medium carrying the stain.
And then the alcohol goes away.
The alcohol all goes away. And so anything left behind just brushes away. All right, I'll do a small piece first. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to get a lot of stain on there and go immediately to wiping it on. Try and get everything while it's still wet. And as it starts to dry out, add a little bit more. All right, so that piece is done. Similar piece just to see the whole process again. I'm going all the way to the edges, getting the whole thing. As it dries out, add a little bit more. All right, so
It
That-
does dry fairly uniform.
Yeah, it dries pretty well. I do have a process for evening it out, which we'll discuss later. All right, so you want to go for it?
Why not? Really want to spill it on the woodwork.
Yes. So I tried to hold the rag right up against it so there's no place for drips to go. So you don't need to press hard, just run the rag lightly over the whole thing. And as you're doing it, just be cognizant that the bevel side is down. It's okay if you screw up and stain the wrong side, but why bother? All right, so we've done one coat of stain on here. And if we look at this, it's dry already. We're only 5 minutes after we've stained this. This is all dry. It's a little bit blotchy. This one's not too bad, but there's some dark spots in there and a light spot in there. If we look down at this piece here, you see we've got quite a light spot there. And so my process for fixing problems like that is just take the same rag. This is denatured alcohol. I just wet out the rag with alcohol and go over the whole thing again. This alcohol versus the alcohol that the stain was originally in doesn't seem to evaporate quite as fast. And just go over the whole thing and don't refill with any stain, but keep the rag nice and wet, and that will even things out substantially. All right, so that's the process. And I find this makes it, evens it out nicely, makes it look a lot more uniform.
So why this particular type of plywood, Nick?
Yeah, so this is a Kume marine plywood. It is a marine plywood means that it has no voids in the interior veneers, where your standard standard home building plywood may have chunks out of the veneers in the middle. The glue isn't necessarily any different than any other plywood, but it is a waterproof glue. And this Akume, you can get large clear veneers without any knots in it. I'm not exactly sure what kind of tree Akume is. I believe it's from Africa someplace. And my understanding is it's a sustainably grown plywood. All right, so that's all the staining. So now imagine the next few days of us working on this boat. We're going to be knocking parts around. What's it going to do to the stain?
It's going to blemish it.
Yeah, it's going to mess things up. What I do to protect things from getting messed up too much, by the way, if you get a leak in your glove, it comes off eventually, when you die. My way to protect these from getting messed up is to put a coat of epoxy over the whole stained surface. Okay. And that way it's buried under something that's hard and protective, and then it does mean we'll have to do a little bit of sanding before we glass to take the gloss off of any epoxy that is there. If we were to just go with this bare stained wood, it would get dinged up. We want to get it under a protective layer of epoxy. So this is the epoxy, and we have a slow hardener and the resins. When we mix these two together, we've got the mixed resin, but we call this resin. It's confusing. Whenever we use epoxy, we always mix the resin and the hardener. So if you need epoxy resin, that means you need mixed epoxy, hardener, and resin. We never put just one on. So we've got a mixing cup here. We'll put it together in the mixing cup and then stir it thoroughly. If we keep it in this mixing cup in a large batch, it can cook off in 10 minutes. But once we have it spread out and in a thin layer where it has the ability to radiate heat, it won't cure as fast. Basically, like a lot of chemical reactions, the word is exothermic. As the chemicals do their magic, they give off heat. And like a lot of chemical reactions, the warmer it is, the faster they react. So you got an exothermic chemical that is creating heat as it reacts, and as that heat increases, it reacts faster, and as it reacts faster, it gets hotter. So we want to have that in mind, but we don't need to be in a panic about it. Okay. So we're going to mix this together in a jug like that, and we have these fancy ketchup pumps here. So unscrew the lid, and it's got a little metal cap over it. These ketchup pumps, there's a mixing tube. One has a red mark on it, one has a blue mark. These pumps, one has a red dot, one has a blue dot. These jugs, one has a red lid, sometimes one has a blue lid. One is blue on front, one is red on front. So if we take this, and I have a system for that, what you're doing right now. This is fine, really? Go for it. So I want to make sure that the tube here isn't too long. For example, we have this extra amount of resin here. If I were to put this tube in this jug at this time, we'd be unhappy because it would be all sticky and then we'd have to take it out to cut it. But this is right here. So my high-tech system for dealing with this problem right now. All right, so jug is in place. We will put this tube in here, and these are just ketchup pumps. They are not high-tech epoxy calibrated things, but they are calibrated sufficiently that I've rarely had them completely fail on me where I had a mistake, but we want to pay attention as we're using them. So the first thing is right now there's nothing in there. So when I press down on it, nothing happens. So we want to prime that pump, and you'll see it come up a little bit slower as it starts to draw some resin into the pump. And it starts making farting noises, and so now it's coming up really slowly. And so now I'm going to push it down. Okay, resin came out just a little bit. I didn't put a lot in there, just enough to see that it's working. And same over here. We'll get this up. There's a little blorp right there. This epoxy is a 2-to-1 mix. So that means that for every 2 parts of the resin, we put in 1 part of hardener. So what's that mean with the pumps?
2 pumps to 1 pump.
That's what you would think.
No,
it's 1 pump to 1 pump.
Oh.
Because this is a shorter pump. So okay. That's something that you want to be cognizant of. Yeah. It's 1 pump to 1 pump. And you want to make sure you get 1 full pump on each one. So the inclination is, particularly the way I have it set up right now, this is kind of awkward. I'll set it up in a little bit more convenient way later. But your inclination is, okay, I need, this much in here. I'll do 5 pumps of this and then 5 pumps of that. That's makes perfect sense until the phone rings and you forgot where you were in your count. So I will always start at on the same jug, do 1 pump to 1 pump. Then make sure the pump comes all the way back up again. When it's cold in the shop, it might take a little while for it to come all the way back up. Then all the way down to the bottom, make sure it comes back up, and all the way down to the bottom.
Is there a maximum amount you would put in one of these cups?
Don't make big batches because that exothermic thing starts to become a problem. Okay. So I would not fill this jug up, this mixing cup up all the way. For what we're doing here, we won't need a lot. I'll probably go up to, 3/4 of an inch or something on here, a couple centimeters. Okay. And so where am I in the count right now? I don't remember, right. But I know I'm 1 pump to 1 pump. Right. So 1 pump to 1 pump. And you want it to come all the way back up. You can give it a little boost, but don't force it up. It flows a lot easier if your shop is a little bit warmer, but wait for it to come all the way back up. So again, I don't remember where I am on the pumps, but I know how much I've got in my jug. I can decide whether I need more or if I don't need more. I want some more. So all the way down, wait for it to come up. And part of the reason I say not to just slam down a bunch of pumps at once is your inclination would be to pump this as fast as you can and not allow it to come all the way up. So be deliberate about it. Let it come all the way up. Make sure it's come all the way. And we'll start out with this much. So now we want to mix. And they generally say you want to mix for about a minute. And the most common way for epoxy to fail is either you get the ratios wrong, somehow you messed up the pumping. If you hear the pump fart or burp or make a weird noise, pay attention because that might mean you didn't get a full pump.
Right, might be some air in there.
Yeah, and it'll happen as you get down to the bottom. That tube will start to suck up air. So with the mixing, if you're doing a minute, it's a minute of vigorous mixing, not a minute of...
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, so get it vigorously mixed. We want it mixed together. And then you want to scrape down the sides. Get all that stuff that's on the sides down into the bottom. And I like to tip the cup a little bit and get down into the corner there. That way it's always flowing down into that corner where I'm mixing, and dig into those corners a bit. Get it thoroughly mixed. And when you think it's thoroughly mixed, give it another few mixes. Again, it really sucks if this doesn't cure on you. And what do you do if it doesn't cure?
I have no idea.
You strip it off.
Really? With what?
Acetone, lacquer thinner, alcohol. And if you've stained it, you've just messed up your stain. Yeah. There's really nothing you can do to, you can do your best to try and get the stain to match, but you're going to be pulling the stain off and it's going to be an ugly mess. Yeah. So again, we want to mix down into the corners, scrape down the sides, And now we've got some epoxy here. I've got some little roller things here. I'm just going to dump that into my roller. The first time with, these are just your typical little hot dog rollers. You get this at a big box store or whatever. Get that saturated a bit.
Are there any type of rollers you wouldn't want to use in this process?
I wouldn't use a big fluffy latex roller.
Yeah.
You know, you want something that.
But any of the sponge rollers are all compatible with this?
They should be, yeah. And so I'm just going to roll it on here and try and get complete coverage. We don't want it sloppy wet, but we want it completely covered. So I'll go down the whole length, get a nice even coverage on there.
Now I've worked with fiberglass a little bit where it's quite thick and I would worry about, I guess, getting it on these edges.
Yeah, you know, I think if you just roll it on here evenly, as long as, you know, if I take this out and the whole thing's sort of dripping as I slap it down on the wood, I might get a mess off the edge. But if I, you know, get some of the excess off the roller before bringing it to the wood and get it down onto the wood, and just, you know, work fairly quickly so it doesn't have a chance to run off the edge. I think that should be good. And this is another chance to even out that stain. The alcohol-based stain that we're using, I've actually dripped stain directly into the epoxy to color the epoxy if I wanted, for some reason, colored epoxy. It's compatible. It works okay. So that's the process for coating these with epoxy. And we're just going to coat them and then leave them be. Do not stack them up.
This isn't smelly like other epoxies I've used.
Yeah, it's not too bad. Yeah, different formulations have different amount of smell. The MAS is relatively low smell.
How worried do you have to be about any particulates getting in this at this point?
I'm not worried about it at all. You know, we will sand everything before we glass, and so, you know, crumbs and splinters and so forth that appear generally come out later in the process.
So basically, you're just looking for an overall wet appearance to the
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, we're just trying to make it wet, and just so there's some actual epoxy between us and the stain. It's not perfect protection, but you know, it's enough. You think of stain sinking way deep into the grain. It doesn't. It's very much on the surface. One stroke of 220 grit on this would take off half the stain. By having it under a layer of epoxy, it just means that one stroke of 220, you can actually remove some epoxy and not end up affecting the color at all.
And it doesn't matter going one way or going
Not at all.
various directions.
Yeah, as soon as you start mixing the epoxy, it's starting to cure. So later on when we're doing the fiberglassing, it becomes a little bit more critical on the timing.
Oh, that's it?
I think that's it. All right, so that's sort of day one, the unboxing and getting stuff ready. Any thoughts on what we did today? Anything that struck you?
I was a little taken aback by how many parts there were when we opened the box.
Yeah, it's a bit intimidating.
So I think this video will be very helpful for people to see that and then to go, okay, yeah, in the video this was it. To be familiar with the pots before you open the box, I think will be a big
Yeah,
plus for people.
yeah. So finding that manual, getting to that manual quickly in the unboxing, opening up to the pages that show the parts, that can be your guide. You can, you know, as you're stripping off all that tape. There's a lot of tape on there. They don't want stuff to break. That's your chance to start to learn a little bit about the kit you're putting together and get a bit familiar with it. You know, we added the stain thing. This is a completely optional thing. I think it looks cool, but it's a completely unnecessary step. We could have gone directly to assembling the hull. This episode was the unboxing, getting stain on it. Next episode will be assembling the hull. If we get to fiberglassing the hull, that would be awesome, but that might be the next. Again, I guess I thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode. If you want to see more of this, please subscribe, do all that wonderful YouTube-y stuff, and we'll see you later, and happy paddling.